Neuroscience. Many people like to talk about that, and maybe you heard the top 10 tricks for selling in a brainy way, or neuroscience said that XYZ. And of course, you can sell more, convince people better, and basically life is just better when you do it in the brain kind of way. Unfortunately, there are a lot of myths around, and today we have an absolute expert on this topic here. Hello and welcome, Dr. Lynda Shaw.
Hi, Niels. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm getting straight into the topic. So first, why are there so many myths around in neuroscience? It's almost like people start to make things up only to make them sound nice.
Yeah, there is. Neuroscience is a really sexy topic, and people think, oh, I've got my level of expertise here. I'm going to inject a bit of this lovely embryonic science, neuroscience, to give it some meat, some more meat on the bone. But in actual fact, it's not giving meat on the bone, because if you are talking neuro nonsense, I will say politely, if you're talking neuro nonsense, you will squash your own credibility for your own area of expertise. So it's actually really not worth putting it in anything that you're delivering unless it's for a very relevant reason and you have researched it properly, so that you know that you're not going to be talking to somebody who knows more about it than you do, and they're going to switch off thinking that person doesn't know what they're talking about. So it is a wonderful, wonderful topic, but we do have to be careful how we use it.
So do you have some, I think you brought something with us or for us today. What are typical myths people are talking about? Maybe we know some of them. So one thing I, for example, have heard very often, I know is, and I hope you can confirm not true, many people still say the left side of the brain is for that, the right side of the brain. According to the look on your face, it is not correct.
No,
because I know that people told me it's not like that. I think 10 years ago, they had a study which said, I think they had this theory in the past, but it's decades ago where they said, sorry, we were wrong about that.
Okay, let me just give you a bit of context here. If you're a scientist, and across a lot of disciplines, if you're a scientist, you come up with an idea. You have this idea, which is the start of your work, and then you do some reading, a lot of reading, to establish whether anybody has thought of your idea before you. You realize, no, you haven't, they haven't. So then you decide to squash it down to your hypotheses. You've got your hypotheses, great, on a roll. You then decide to open it up, and you then have to create an experiment or experiments using fMRI, EEG, or any behavioral studies, whatever. So you open it up, and then you're on the experiment, and then you've got the results, masses of results, and then you've got to interpret the results. So you then narrow it down. You then start to, you then get a very small few boxes and a few graphs of what the results mean, and then you've got to make sense of it. You make sense of it by opening it up in the discussion. So you then got your results, you refer back to your literature review and try to make sense of what you have. So now you've got this massive discussion, and that's where you earn the right to an opinion, not before. So then you then examine it, you make sense of it, and then you narrow it down to your conclusion and ideas about future research on that particular topic. Then you write a paper, a peer-reviewed paper, and you luckily, hopefully, get it published in a very good journal. Then all hell breaks loose. Because what happens then is the popular press or somebody is looking around, and they start to see this latest paper that has discovered something that is really quite new, and they then change it slightly according to their audience. So it depends on who they're writing for. So
they make it simpler, or just more, they try to simplify it for their reading audience.
Simplify it to their reading audience, which means that they have changed the meaning slightly. And then what happens is
changing the meaning slightly. When you stick to science, you have facts. When someone tells me I just changed the facts slightly, that's the point where I would say you shouldn't, or you can't, or both.
Quite. But if you read some of people, not all journalists, but if you read some stuff that goes out there, you just read, and then you read the original paper and you think that doesn't say that at all. And then what happens is people are reading this stuff and they think, oh, That's going to, that piece of information is going to help me sell my products or my services. Yes, and I'm going to, then we have the world of neuromyths. Now, neuromyths does come out of other things as well, but this is what has been happening, and that's one of the biggest problems. And as you quite rightly say, one of the ones that stick, and this is the issue, people come up with this idea, idea then turns into a belief, and they hold on to that belief as if it's the gospel truth. Now, any scientist will tell you there is no gospel truth. It depends on the evidence so far. Everything is up for falsification. So therefore, you then have got something like the left hemisphere, right hemisphere. So left brain people are logical, right brain people are creative. No, stop it. It's not true. It's not true. You might as well say somebody's Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. It doesn't bear any relation to anything. However, there are certain hemispheric specializations. For instance, we know that in the majority of right-handed people, the language center is on the left, but only certain language processes happen on the left, like production of speech and like comprehension of speech. That goes on in the left hemisphere, but intonation, context goes on in the right hemisphere. So in actual fact, when it's talking about language, even something that is predominantly on one hemisphere, you are still using both sides of the brain, folks. Both sides of the brain always in everything that we do. There is some theories where positive emotion goes on in the left hemisphere, negative emotion in the right hemisphere, but no, we are actually using both hemispheres, and we've got this lovely bundle of nerves in the middle that attaches both hemispheres called the corpus callosum, which makes sure that we are using the whole brain in everything we do. So please stop talking about logical people being left-brained and creative people being right-brained. It's not true.
So just moving to the next probably myth then is, when you say we use the full brain, maybe you heard people who say, oh, we only use 10% of our brain. Okay, I think I'm hitting the right ones here. So that is just made up, or where did they get the idea from that we only use 10%? Because 10% of the brain, what do we do with the other 90%? I don't think that the human body is designed for inefficiency after thousands of years, millions of years of evolution. Why should we only use 10% of our brain?
Okay, could you pick up your pen or pencil, please, Niels?
Here we are.
Right. Okay, bash your head. Bash it here. Bash it here. Bash it at the back. Thank you. Now, if I asked you to do the same and you were holding a sledgehammer and you bashed anywhere on your brain, would you get brain damage?
Yeah.
Yeah, you would get brain damage.
Of course.
We use the whole brain. We don't use 10% of our brain. We use our whole brain all the time. We actually don't know where that myth came from, but it could be that the glial cells are a ratio of 10 to 1, that the glial cells support neurons. So it might be something to do with that. We certainly are capable of using our brain and our mind and our comprehension far greater than we ever think possible. We can always learn. We can always do more. But no, we don't use just 10% of our brain. We use our whole brain all of the time.
So when they say about the brain, there are certain ways how people learn, and that's by the way something which sadly a teacher told me in the UK. I know that it's not true, but some people still say there are 3 ways how we learn: visual, audio, kinesthetic, and one of these 3 is your learning method. So you're either that or that or that. So completely wrong.
Completely wrong. In terms of neuroscience, the VAC principle, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, has long been defunct. That is not how we learn. We learn best when we learn in relation to what the topic is. So if we are learning to drive a car, we need to be kinesthetic. We need to drive it. We're not going to learn just by visually doing something or listening to a tape. We've got to do it. So learning things very much is in relation to what that task is that we need to learn. Some people, though, have a preference to looking at information visually or listening or doing. They do have a preference, but it's not necessarily the way they learn. It's just their personal preference. And for schools to exploit that is really old-fashioned, but I understand it's still taught in our education systems and teacher training colleges and the like.
So that means that the education in Germany you need to have as a teacher is completely different, a lot more complex than in the UK, unfortunately. So that means even certain colleges that teach something which is plain wrong, and then teachers act on a wrong assumption of how people learn.
The problem is that people hold on to this belief, as I said earlier, when people have an idea, they hold on to that belief and they're not going to let it go. They are not going to let it go. And they see it working, but they see it through a confirmation bias. They see it through confirming their beliefs that things are working, rather than looking at when it hasn't worked and actually looking at it in a more objective way, if they possibly can. So yes, certainly there are some institutions that still teach the principle of VAC, but it isn't the best way that we learn.
What are other myths that people normally listen to? Because I know that neuroscience became sort of a hot topic about anything: how to use the brain to sell better, to negotiate better, to understand people better, to be better in conversation. Pretty much anyone jumps on the topic of neuro XYZ. They just put neuro in front of it to make it, in my opinion, more sellable. Even people who have no scientific foundation at all and never looked into a single study misuse the term of neuro just to make their offer more appealing to certain clients. So what other myths do we have that certainly are around but wrong?
Multitasking is a delicious one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a delicious one. We now know that there is no such thing as multitasking. And if you tell me not even for women, I will have a paddy, because that is just not going to happen. So multitasking, we don't. Research has now shown quite definitely that we switch from tasks very, very rapidly. So if you're in a business situation and you are a boss and you go into somebody's office and you're interrupting them, and they're on a piece of work, they're on a deadline and they're trying to finish, you are doing them no favors and the business no favors either, because every time they switch from doing that task to listening to you or whatever's going on, that switch is going to have a cost in efficiency and a cost in time. So in actual fact, we would do much better if we chunk our way that we work and just concentrate on one thing and get it done. And if it's a long piece of work, have a break, come back to it, absolutely fine, but chunk it and just work on that, and don't do this switching thing, because it's costing industry a fortune in costs. So multitasking doesn't work. We don't multitask, we switch.
Are there really people around who say something like, even for women? I mean, that is openly sexist to say it in the most. Are these people still around?
Yes, sadly,
wow.
Yes. Yeah, they are. But women multitask better than men. No, they don't. No, they don't. Nobody multitasks. Nobody.
Wow.
We switch.
Yeah.
That we switch on tasks that take a lot of attention. Sure, we can empty the dishwasher, put the kettle on, put the coffee machine on, feed the dog, do all those things, multitask that way, but that's not taking our attention. Where the switching costs are incurred is when we are switching for things that take a lot of our attentional resources, and that is when companies are losing a lot of money.
So what about when people say you can train your brain like a muscle? So first, I'm of course not a physicist or an MD. So first, I think, speaking from a biological point of view, the brain is not a muscle, or is it? No, it's not.
No, the brain is an organ. It's not a muscle. So you can say the brain is like a muscle, in that when you work it, it will change. So you can say that, because we know about neuroplasticity now, which is phenomenal, absolutely amazing in develop and grow those lovely new neural pathways, and we develop our brain anatomy as well as biology, as well as everything, our behavior. So our behavior changes our brain and our brain changes our behavior. We know that continues all the time now. So when it comes to working the brain, yes, we do change it as we would change a muscle by using a bicep curl to change our bicep. But it's like a muscle. It isn't a muscle. But you can use the analogy to make a point.
So some people then claim that anyone can learn absolutely anything. Some people are just too lazy to learn. Is that a valid claim? So could anyone be the next Stephen Hawking if we just read enough books or learn enough?
There is always a top down and bottom up, and the environment and social upbringing that will make a difference that influences our brain and also influence the way we learn. So genetically, we will have our DNA, it will be a certain way, and that is innate. That is what we are born with. But what we do with that is, well, our top-down processing, which is our reading, our learning, our beliefs, and all of that going on, and our environment around us. Well, who is our social group? Who is our peer group? Who do we aspire to be like? All of those things influence what we're going to learn and how we're going to learn it. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't definitely improve upon what we've got. However, if you are or let's say a 20 stone, 200-pound lorry driver, you are not going to be dancing in Swan Lake. So, there are certain things that we are not going to be able to achieve. So people say, oh my gosh, you can be anything, do anything. There are boundaries, there are certain things, but if you are absolutely determined to do something and you have the tools, if you like, to be that, then you can certainly have a go and see if you can learn and evolve by being around the right people, learning from the right people, good people, reading like mad, and all of that. Yeah.
Especially as you now talked about neuroplasticity, which, as far as I know, is a reasonably new area of neuroscience. So some people immediately jumped on it and said, when there is neuroplasticity, which means we can basically create new brain cells, what some people claim, it means that it's just an excuse when some people say, I am older, so I am a slower learner. Is it true that with just creating, so first, is the claim creating new brain cells? Is that a correct claim? And second, is anyone able to learn at any age due to neuroplasticity?
We create new neural pathways and new connections, and that is where the learning happens. And so it's creating those that matter enormously. But when it comes to our age and learning new things, yes, we can learn new things, as long as there isn't a serious cognitive impairment. But yes, we can learn new things, no matter how old we are. It might be slower, but to be quite honest, who cares? Who cares? We really worry about what people think. We really worry about how we are perceived. They're not thinking about us. No one's thinking about us. Nobody really cares apart from those who are nearest and dearest. Everyone else is too busy doing their thing. So if you want to learn something new, do it. It doesn't matter how long it takes. The key is to enjoy it and have fun.
Are there any other myths we need to know about? Because let's face it, when we hear someone talking and they use the term neuro and then use some specialized items no one ever heard about before, the likelihood that people will believe what they hear is very high, because they simply say, I don't understand it. Someone's on a podium talking to me, so most likely that person will be right. And are there any myths we should be aware of which we haven't talked about so far?
I think you have to be very careful. If you are a person who stands on a podium, if you are a person who influences others in any way, in the way that you deliver information, in the way you are managing, whether you are a speaker, whether you are a leader, whatever you're doing, if you are one of those people, you have a position of privilege and a position of responsibility. And with that responsibility means that you must deliver what is accurate, because people are going to believe you because you are in that place of influence. And if you are in a place of influence and they're going to think, oh my gosh, well, they said so, so it must be true, that is a big responsibility. And we need to be held accountable for that. Always be held accountable for that, because people are susceptible to following. They need people to follow. So with that comes a lot of responsibility, and that's the one thing I particularly want to say. In terms of other issues, I think we have a lot that goes on in the gender world. A lot of people talk about the male and the female brain. It drives me crazy. It absolutely drives me crazy, because we do have the nature nurture debate, of course, that goes on constantly throughout these kinds of discussions. But even when a woman knows that the baby that she is carrying inside her, when even embryonically, as the baby, as it becomes clear and she can find out whether the baby is a male or female, studies show that even the parents of the bump will behave differently if they know it's a boy or a girl in there. And we do behave. Studies have shown hugely, loads and loads of experiments, that we do treat boys and girls differently, even subconsciously. Even when we think we are being completely fair, there is a lot of evidence to show that we are actually treating the genders differently. So we are going to wire the brains differently. Yes, there is biology. Yes, we've got the chromosomes. Yes, we have got testosterone. Yes, we've got all of these things, but we are training the brain to be stereotypically one way or the other. And so therefore, I am very, very mindful of talking about gender when it comes to neuroscience, because we don't necessarily know whether the different structural biological things that are going on in one specific gender means that they're going to behave differently. That we don't necessarily know that that structure means different behavior. So,
yeah, and also I think we know that gender is not binary. Gender is a spectrum. There is just not male, female. There's a lot more than the binary gender model, although the industry still seems to target the binary model. And even when it comes to sales, when I went to a very well-known in Knightsbridge located place where you can buy goods, I'm not going to name the brand here. When you go to the toys department, it's still, one area is mainly blue and one area is mainly pink. And then you see that the industry is still working deeply in the binary gender model and trying to trigger our brain, because we often grew up being told there is a binary gender model. So we maybe are primed to look at these triggers of colors, of forms.
totally right. Absolutely, totally right. Remember that we are influenced by our environmental and social upbringing, as well as top-down and bottom-up influences. So all of that is we are constantly being exposed to influences that are actually wiring our brain a certain way. And when we know that, when we're aware of it, and this is what is delicious about neuroscience and understanding it, when we know a little bit about neuroscience, proper neuroscience, it dawns on us that actually we've got more control of our destiny than we realize. And that is an amazing place to be. So if we are being exposed to these gender-specific items, we can think to ourselves, actually, no, I'm going to buy this child a blue toy if it's a girl, or a pink toy if it's a boy, or I'm going to get my little girl to go on the steep slide as like the boys are doing, or whatever it is that going on. But we have,
anatomically, there is no difference between the brain depending on the biological gender. Is that correct then?
It's really complicated, Niels. It is very. There is a very good scientist who put something on YouTube a while ago, and I'd be blowed if I can find it now. And I've looked a lot. You've got the chromosomes to consider. You've got the hormones to consider. There are biological differences that are going on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a boy is going to have the boy dose of testosterone and hormones, or the girl dose. There's a lot happening. And again, the influences outside of that is something we have to consider. But we all know that there are far more, amongst us that are just boy and girl.
Yeah, I mean, I am, as you know, I'm a very outspoken member of the LGBT community. So I know that gender is a spectrum. And can we bring it down to probably one phrase? When there's a really complex issue like gender and someone comes up with a really simple solution, most likely it's not correct.
The danger of neuroscience is oversimplification.
Yeah.
Okay, that is the danger of it, because what happens is people get very comfortable at understanding something at a simplified level.
Of course.
Which they are then find useful. And then they hold on to it, and that is what they stick with. So simplification is one of the enemies of neuroscience, because neuroscience is an incredibly complex topic. Now, I've got a girlfriend who, and when she's a novelist, when she is researching a period in history, she goes to a children's library. to look at it, to see, okay, I've got a handle on that. I can understand that now. Now I'll read deeper. That works. But in neuroscience, what majority of people do is they look up something that is third, fifth hand of research, simplify it, hold on to that, and they don't read further. They don't explore further. So if anybody wants to talk to me about neuroscience, first of all, oversimplification is the enemy. And secondly, it is not the be all and end all of topics. It really isn't, because I've got psychology in my background as well as neuroscience. And I think I've got a handle on somebody, especially in my area of expertise. So I've really got it nailed. And I think I've got a handle on someone, and then poof, they come along and I go way off piece. And I think that's not what's supposed to happen. But hang on, we're talking about human beings. We're talking about the human brain. There is always going to be off-piste curveballs going on. So we can't set anything in stone. We have to be flexible and malleable when it comes to talking about neuroscience.
And I think that is what science is about, because sometimes we find something out and 10 years later we have better methods how to find out what it really is and find out that we were wrong in the first place.
Yeah,
because I know that there's a whole book series published called Simplify Your Life, which basically tries to simplify absolutely everything. And you know that there are certain vendors who simply say, there's this neuroscientific book of 500 pages. Here is the 5-page PDF abstract you can read for £20. Most likely it is not wise to go to any of these shortcuts. You need to go to the primary source and need to put the effort in to properly read what it's about. Is that the core message?
Yeah, core message is you can simplify things as long as it's correct simplification.
Yeah.
So make sure the source of your information is a person who really knows what they're talking about.
When you simplify, after we just talked about the gender aspect of it, a certain level of simplification cannot be correct anymore, because you always tend to oversimplify. When you have a complex aspect like gender, which is a complex spectrum of, so far I think we know 60 different genders, maybe in 2 years we know 200. So simplifying it will come to a level where you go the wrong way when you oversimplify.
Yes, oversimplification is an enemy of learning.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. When people are now sitting here watching at this video cast and say, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. So first we have to admit it is a lot of work. However, when they now start and think, I think I need to know more about neuroscience, but where to start? Because Google in this case probably is not your friend, because when you Google neuroscience, you find everyone who wants to say something about neuroscience. What are Lynda Shaw's top 3 tips where to start when it comes to neuroscience?
Work out why you want to know. You know, sometimes actually it doesn't add to your work. It might not add to what you need. Work out why you want to know. When you've worked out why, you can then boil it down to certain topics. Like, for instance, if you're in a boardroom and you have got one board member who says something, and this board member always responds in the same way, and you've got this codependency going on and the communication is rubbish, this huge conflict, and it's an issue. But if you then think, right, they've got an habitual response, I want to know about habits. So then you can find out about habits and habitual responses and what we can do about that in terms of neuroscience. So that is really helpful. And always, always go to a reputable person to find out anything. That's great tips I would give.
Excellent. That is very, very valuable content for our listeners and of course our viewers here today. If it's okay for you, I'm going to put your contact data in the show notes of this video cast. Is that okay for you?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. So feel free to get in touch with Dr. Lynda Shaw. And at the end of this at the end of this video cast, there's only one thing for me left to say. Lynda, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Niels. It was an absolute pleasure.